In a previous video, I showed fixing some mechanical problems with my planer. Now that I proved that the planer works, I've been taking it all apart so that I can clean and paint each piece individually. So I will tell you, one of the keys when you're taking something apart that's complicated like this is keeping organized. I have separate trays here, and each one of the trays is some different part of the machine. Now, I didn't feel this one was complicated enough to actually take pictures of it, but I do have this video I'm recording now to sort of help me remember. And there you have it, folks. One fully disassembled planer. So the first thing I did is gather together all the smaller parts that I can actually dip in a rust-dissolving solution. But before I put it in, I need to get all the debris off. So I'm just going to immerse it in water, and then with a brush kind of brush it off and get all these parts cleaned up, and then get them in there. And here's the Evapor-Rust product, and all you do is immerse your parts in it and it dissolves the rust. What I really like about it is that it's super safe and you can just flush it down the drain when you're done with it. So you just put your parts, they can be a little bit wet, it doesn't hurt anything. But then you just fill it up, and they got to be completely immersed in order for it to work, because it only takes the rust off where it contacts. And I'll fill this whole tray up. And this will only take really overnight, because this is a fresh bottle. As it gets older, it takes longer and it doesn't work as well. But since this is a fresh gallon, this should be fine if I just leave it overnight. So this is what the parts look like after sitting for a day and a half in the Evapor-Rust. You can see that the rust is all gone, and even the paint is stripped off quite a bit. This paint that's left, I can just push it with my finger and get rid of it. So this paint should come off real easy. Then I can wash these, let them dry, and repaint them. First I'm washing them in the sink. And now something like this post that still shows just a little bit of rust residue, I'm going to take an abrasive pad, like a Scotch-Brite pad, and see, that shines it right up. I want to see the progress I've been making. Here's all the washers. Here's all the other parts. After all those parts dried, I laid them out on wax paper for a coat of paint. First I paint the front side, and after it dries I can flip them over and do the back on the same wax paper. So now I've made up a soapy water bucket just like you would mop your floors with. I'm going to go through the parts one by one. I'm going to blow off any loose sawdust into the garbage can, and then the rest of this I'm going to clean off with soap and water. Now, some of these parts, they're going to have a little bit of oil on them because this was an oil and greased machine. So for those, I'm just going to use Goo Gone to get that oil off. So now this part has a sticker on it, and the best way to handle stickers is to peel them off before you wash your part. That way when you wash it, let it dry, and you paint it, you can put the sticker back on, and you can use a little bit of spray adhesive or epoxy if you need to get it to stay back on. But in this case, this one's just telling me don't open the cover while the belt is turning, and everyone should know that. So I'm going to peel this one off and not worry about putting it back on. Now this guard has a lot of schmutz right in here that I can't get off with just soap and water. So we need something with a little more power. Keep in mind I have water here, but all of my outlets in this garage are GFCI protected, so I don't have to worry about that if I should get this wet. Also be careful when you're using a wire wheel on the end of your angle grinder. The wires tend to fly off and they can actually stick you. So wear a substantial, like this is a leather apron or something that can protect you from that, and of course always eye shields. And here's what that blade guard looks like after hitting it with the wire wheel. Nice finish, got it right down to the steel. Unfortunately, I don't have the time or energy to do that to every surface of every piece, but this is really the ideal way to strip it down to the bare metal and repaint it. But since I don't have that kind of time, I am going to be repainting over the existing paint in most cases. After the parts were all cleaned up, I gave them 2 or 3 coats of paint. I use spray paint wherever possible because it's a lot faster than putting paint on with a brush. The aerosol fumes aren't the greatest thing for your health, so I tried to organize it such that I could paint right before I went in for the night, and I kept the door up. Next I'm moving on to parts that don't require paint, starting with these bed rollers. And this is what it looks like after I use the wire wheel from the angle grinder. Man, that's a nice surface. So powerful.
For some of the longer rods, I clamped a power wire brush to the table and then rotated the rod as I pushed it through. This worked pretty well too.
Well, I used the powered wire wheel to do these bearing surfaces, not the bearings, but this little boss surface that before the feed roll starts. I didn't want to use the powered one on the feed roll because there's kind of some sharp edge here that helps grip the wood, and the angle grinder has a tendency to dull sharp edges. So instead I'm just going to use a hand brush and go all over this, because at least I'm stroking with the gripping surface. That way I won't dull it so badly. So next I'm going to do something about all these machine surfaces, like basically parts that I don't want paint on. And I'm going to use a product called Bow Shield T9. It's basically like wax that's liquefied in a can. It works pretty well. I have had some stuff that did re-rust over time, but you just got to be diligent about scraping it off and reapplying. And all you do is, I got a fresh tote here, and I'm just going to spray it on. And then I take a cloth. It really doesn't take much of it. It's pretty thin viscosity. But I'm just going to take a shop rag, wipe it all up and down, get it all over every surface of that part, and then just let it sit to dry. And it's going to take a good week, maybe 2 weeks. It depends on the temperature and humidity, but it does actually offer pretty good rust protection. And that's what all those parts look like after putting the Bow Shield T9 on. Now I just got to let them dry, and they'll be rust protected.
Then for the base, I put tape on all the machine surfaces that I didn't want to get paint on. And ta-da, here's the painted base. I did all this with brushwork. It was pretty delicate because I couldn't get any paint in a lot of those holes, and that's why I couldn't use spray paint either. Next, I worked on cleaning up the 4 posts. I did this before I assembled the planer because it's easier to reach these surfaces now, where I can just flip the whole base, and then I can get at the other side of the post that I couldn't reach originally.
So here's another one of those detail items that really makes a restoration project look nice. I have the original sticker, which I peeled off with heat, and now I'm going to put it back on this motor. I got some 5-minute epoxy that I was mixing for other purposes, and I'm just going to spread it on there. Now I'm going to start assembly as I get the parts finished painting. That way I can sort of build the parts I got finished painting, and I'll work my way up to the whole planer being built. Got a little bit of grit inside that hole, and one shop trick to get rid of grit is if you just take your oil can and you spritz a little bit of oil on a shop rag, when you reach in there and clean it out, that grit's going to want to stick to that oil. And there you have it. Now here's another tip. Sometimes, even though when you paint carefully, you still dribble a little bit of paint inside your machined holes that cannot have paint in them. So, get yourself a wire brush that's round and use the diagonal cutters to snip off the end of it. Take my cordless drill, I can chuck this up in there. There's no easier way to clean out a hole. And of course, another way to clean out those holes is to use a rotary tool.
And of course, the process of cleaning up the machine removes all the lubricants, so you're going to want to make sure you grease the machine as you assemble it, just like I'm doing here.
There, I got this all mounted. Now for the fun part, I got to clean off this top. I'm going to use it with my wire brush again.
And here's what a buff top should look like. Notice how the light reflects off of it? It's a very nice finish.
Now I'm going to polish it with paste wax. Just Johnson brand, this stuff's been around forever. It's wonderful. You wipe it on, you let it set for half an hour, then you buff it, and it gives you a rust-proof shine. And your wood glides right over the metal.
Now for some final assembly, starting with these bed rollers while I don't have anything else in the way. Then I'll move on to bring the carriage over, and the cutter head with the gearbox. Make sure you use a helper for moving heavy items. You don't want to strain your back. And this final part, I'm going to be assembling the rods that lock the carriage in position when I move it up and down.
Okay, it wasn't easy. It took a lot of time and fiddling, but I used this spacer block. I touched it, and then I would move it to this side, and I finally got everything parallel from side to side so that it'll cut a consistent thickness. On a machine like this, it's got 4 lead screws, one on each corner. So whenever you're adjusting it up and down, you have to fiddle underneath with the chain, trying to get the sprocket to go past one tooth. It was very difficult, but I finally got it, and I'm happy with it. These are the new knives I bought. They are razor blade sharp. So now I want to show you how much better these feed roll bearings are. I only had to replace one block. The other ones I just had to take apart, clean, and oil. But look at, before I had to use a wrench, a pipe wrench to turn these. Now I can just free spin them with my hand. That's amazing. So if you're wondering about the color scheme choices of this planer, most of my tools are Delta. So I was sort of trying to match the Delta and gray and black look. As much as I would have loved to just paint a nice blue Delta or maybe buy a Delta logo decal to put on here, turning this into a Delta planer would be dishonest, so I feel I have to put the original nameplate back on it.
Finally, this planer is ready for a test run. I'm going to try to take the finish off this oak board. And hey, it starts up. That's always a good sign. Now this project is not for the light of heart. Rebuilding this planer and completely restoring it took me about 2 months. So keep that in mind if you're going to refinish your tools. You have to value your time. Maybe it is cheaper for you to buy a new tool instead of restore it. But for me, I really like this planer and I wanted to restore it. And look at that beautiful board. It's going to work good for a long time now.